You may have heard so many stories about my marriage, the fairy tale that captured the world's heart and the tragedy that followed, but what you may not know are the silent truths, the private battles, and the emotional storms that shaped the ending. Today I will open the door to the parts no one dared to speak of, the whispers behind the palace walls, the moments that changed everything, and the reasons that remain untold until now. From the very beginning, there was an image already painted for me, a picture of perfection, a story that had been written long before I stepped into it. And the weight of that expectation rested on my shoulders every single day. It was not just about being a wife, it was about embodying an ideal living up to a fantasy that the world wanted to see, and yet had nothing to do with the reality of my heart. It was about smiling when I was breaking inside. It was about speaking with grace when my voice wanted to tremble. It was about wearing the crown of composure, even when it felt unbearably heavy. There were rules spoken and unspoken about how I should walk, how I should speak, how I should look, how I should react. And even how I should feel. My every step was watched, my every glance was interpreted, my every word was weighed and judged, and it felt as though I was carrying the burden of millions of eyes and centuries of tradition. There was no space for mistakes, no room for vulnerability, no chance to simply be Diana. I was expected to be a symbol, flawless and untouchable, and yet I was human with fears and hopes and flaws and moments of weakness. But in that world, weakness was not allowed. Instead, it had to be hidden behind a perfect posture and a perfect smile. I began to feel as though I was playing a role on a stage where the script had been written for me, but my own lines, my own truth were erased before I could speak them. Every public appearance was a performance. Every private moment carried the echo of that same performance. The pressure seeped into my soul until I could no longer tell where the image ended and I began. And with each passing day, I felt a little further away from myself. The joy that should have come with love and companionship was replaced by the constant awareness that I was being measured against an impossible standard. The warmth of genuine connection was replaced by the cold demands of duty. The person I once was vibrant, spontaneous, and full of laughter began to fade into the background as the perfect version of me took center stage, a version that felt foreign and distant. From my heart, it was not only exhausting, it was suffocating, and the more I tried to live up to that image, the more I lost pieces of who I truly was. Every smile for the cameras was another mask layered over my real emotions. Every wave to the crowd was a gentle push further away from my own truth. And though I understood the importance of my role, the honor it carried, and the love it inspired in so many, it came at a cost. I was never fully prepared to pay the cost of sacrificing my identity, the cost of burying my authentic self beneath a polished exterior, the cost of becoming a symbol at the expense of being a person. And while the world saw a fairy tale, I was living inside a cage, built not of iron, but of expectation, one that was invisible to everyone but me, yet heavy enough to weigh me down every moment of the day. The realization that freedom was the only way to preserve my spirit did not arrive in a single moment. It came gradually, like the slow lifting of a fog, revealing a truth I had been too afraid to face for so long. I had convinced myself that endurance was strength, that staying was an act of courage, that sacrifice was a necessary part of love. But with each passing day, I began to see that what I was sacrificing was not just my comfort or my happiness, it was my very sense of self. I had molded myself to fit into a life that demanded perfection, silence, and compliance. I had silenced my instincts, ignored my needs, and pushed my feelings aside in order to keep the peace and maintain the image that was expected of me. But deep inside, a quiet voice kept reminding me that I was more than the role I played, that I had dreams and passions, and a heart that longed for authenticity. That voice grew stronger with every moment I felt unseen, with every time my truth was overshadowed by the version of me that others preferred. The more I tried to suppress it, the more it pressed against the walls I had built around myself, until I could no longer pretend it was not there. I began to understand that freedom was not selfishness. It was survival, that to continue living in a way that erased me would not only destroy my spirit, but would also make it impossible for me to give the world the best of who I truly was. I realized that I could not inspire others to live honestly if I was living in a way that denied my own truth. I could not speak about compassion and courage if I was living in a way that denied my own truth. I could not speak about compassion and courage if I did not extend them to myself. And so the thought of freedom shifted from being a distant dream to being a necessity, not a luxury, but a lifeline. The more I envisioned it, the more I could breathe again, the more I could imagine a life where my choices were my own, where my laughter was real, where my pain could be acknowledged and healed. Rather than hidden away under layers of duty and expectation, I began to see that choosing freedom did not mean erasing the past or forgetting the love that once existed. It meant honoring myself enough to step into a future that allowed me to grow rather than shrink. It meant accepting that some chapters must close, not because they were meaningless, but because they had taught me everything they were meant to teach me. It meant walking away not in anger, but in clarity, knowing that the life ahead, however uncertain, would be mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of waking up in the morning and feeling whole. I knew that freedom would not erase the challenges. It would not silence the voices of the world. It would not rewrite history, but it would give me the one thing I had been missing for so long, the ability to live as myself, fully and without apology. And once I saw that clearly, I understood that to stay would be to slowly disappear, while to leave would be to finally return to myself. The isolation that turned my heart into a silent battlefield was not sudden. It crept in quietly until it surrounded me like an unshakable fog. At first I thought it was simply part of the adjustment to a new life, one that demanded so much and offered so little space for myself. But soon I realized it was deeper than that. It was a loneliness that existed, even in the most crowded of rooms. It was being surrounded by people and yet feeling completely unseen because their presence was tied to duty and not to connection. I would attend events, stand in grand halls, shake hands and smile for hours. But inside I felt as if there was an invisible wall between me and everyone else, a wall built from formality, tradition and unspoken rules. There was always someone nearby, but rarely someone truly close, someone who could see past the role and into the person I was beneath it. All the conversations were polite, the gestures refined, but intimacy was scarce, and authenticity even scarcer. I began to notice that there were fewer and fewer people I could truly open up to, because trust had become a fragile and precious thing in my world. One wrong word could become a headline. One moment of vulnerability could be misunderstood or twisted until it no longer resembled the truth. So I learned to keep my heart guarded, to lock away my deeper feelings and thoughts in a place only I could reach, but in doing so I became my own companion, my own confidant. And while independence can be a strength, it can also become a heavy burden when it is forced upon you day after day. I found myself longing for a conversation that was unfiltered for laughter, that was genuine, for the kind of companionship that doesn't require you to measure every word before it leaves your lips. But that kind of closeness was rare, and the more I craved it, the more I noticed its absence. The silence of my private life grew louder with every passing year, until it became a constant hum in the background, a reminder that while the world believed I had everything, I often felt I had no one. It was in that isolation that my mind became a battlefield, thoughts clashing with emotions, hope fighting against despair, strength wrestling with the ache of vulnerability. I would replay moments over and over in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I could have spoken more openly, if I could have bridged the gap between myself and the people around me. But the truth was that the structure of my life made such closeness almost impossible. It demanded distance, and I lived in that distance day after day until it became my normal. And yet inside I knew it was anything but normal. I knew that human connection was not meant to be rationed or guarded so tightly, but my world had made it, so my days were filled with beautiful places and formal occasions, yet my heart ached for something simple and real, a quiet moment with someone who saw me not as a title or an image, but as a woman with feelings and fears and dreams. The isolation did not just live in my surroundings, it lived inside me, shaping the way I saw the world and the way I saw myself, until even my own thoughts felt like they were whispering through walls I could not tear down. A life where public perfection overshadowed private pain was like living under a constant spotlight that burned away the softer truths of my existence, every moment carefully curated to appear graceful, composed and unshakable, even when inside I felt the opposite. The world wanted to see elegance. They wanted to believe in the flawless picture they had painted of me. And so I became skilled at hiding the cracks, smiling when my heart was heavy, speaking gently, when my voice wanted to break, walking with poise when I wanted to collapse. The cameras caught the gowns, the jewels, the charity visits, the handshakes and the smiles, but they never captured the lonely silences that came afterward. The moments when I sat alone with my thoughts, feeling the weight of a life that was admired but not always understood. The reality was that my pain was not something the world was prepared to see. They wanted their princess to be a dream, and dreams do not cry. Dreams do not falter, dreams do not admit that the beauty comes at a price, and so I learned to hold it all inside, to let the performance become second nature, until the act was almost convincing even to me. But the truth was that the perfection they celebrated often felt like a wall between me and my own emotions, because to admit the hurt would be to shatter the illusion, and that illusion had become my duty. I often found myself in rooms filled with people feeling utterly alone, unable to share my real thoughts, because vulnerability could be seen as weakness and weakness could be seen as failure. It was a silent bargain I made every day to protect the image, while quietly losing pieces of myself in the process. The photographs that people loved to look at did not show the tears that came in the quiet hours or the deep sense of isolation that no amount of applause or admiration could erase it. It was a strange contradiction to be adored by so many, yet known by so few, and that gap between perception and reality grew wider with every passing year. My private struggles were always pushed aside for the sake of maintaining the public picture, and in doing so, my emotional needs often went unmet. There were moments when I longed to simply say, I am not okay, but the role demanded otherwise. The role demanded that I stand tall. Even when my spirit felt tired, it demanded that I keep smiling through the storms that raged quietly in my heart. And the more I kept it hidden, the more it consumed me. The image of perfection became a prison. And in that prison, my private pain was not only unseen, it was invalidated, because if the world saw the perfect picture, then surely everything must be perfect inside, but it was not. And I carried that truth quietly behind every appearance, behind every wave, behind every elegant gesture, as the world celebrated an image that did not tell the whole story. The loss of trust that slowly unraveled the bond we once shared was not something that happened overnight. It was a gradual erosion, a series of moments, both big and small, that chipped away at the foundation until it was no longer strong enough to hold us together in the beginning. I believed in the bond. I believed in the promises, in the shared dreams, in the idea that two people could stand together against the world. But as time went on, I began to feel small cracks forming, tiny doubts that I tried to push aside, hoping they would heal themselves, but they did not. Instead, they deepened each time a word was spoken that did not match in action each time something was hidden, instead of shared each time my feelings were dismissed, instead of understood, and little by little, I stopped leaning on that bond. The warmth and safety that I once felt began to feel uncertain, like a door that could close at any moment. I began to question not just the relationship but myself, wondering if I was imagining things, if perhaps my heart was being too sensitive or my mind too suspicious. But the truth was that trust is not only built by love, it is maintained by honesty. And when honesty begins to fade, trust follows. Soon after, there were moments when I looked for reassurance and instead found distance moments when I wanted answers, but was met with silence moments when I wanted connection, but felt only the presence of a wall. And each of those moments left a mark, a small scar that reminded me to be cautious with my emotions. The openness that once allowed us to share freely became guarded. The conversations that used to be full of hope and laughter became calculated and careful, as though we were both measuring how much of ourselves we could reveal without consequence. It is a strange thing to live beside someone, and yet feel you are living parallel lives walking in the same direction, but never truly meeting in the middle. The absence of trust does not always look like conflict. Sometimes it looks like politeness that hides unspoken truths. Sometimes it looks like smiles that cover unasked questions. Sometimes it looks like the quiet acceptance of things you cannot change, even when they hurt you deeply. And so I learned to keep more of myself to myself, to rely less on that bond, more on my own strength, because the safety net I once believed in no longer felt secure. And while the world may have seen two people standing together, what I felt was a growing space between us, a space filled with things unsaid and truths unacknowledged. And it was in that space that love began to feel fragile, no longer the steady constant it had once promised to be, but something I had to protect alone without the comfort of knowing someone else was protecting it with me. The loss of trust was not loud. It was quiet. It was in the small hesitations, the lingering doubts, the subtle changes that no one else could see, but I could feel them, and I knew that once trust begins to unravel, it is rarely restored to what it once was, no matter how much you might want it to be. The constant intrusion that left no safe space for love to heal was like living in a world where every moment was shared with strangers, where every expression, every gesture, every pause was open to interpretation by people who knew nothing of the truth, yet felt entitled to define it for me. There was no such thing as a truly private moment, because even in the quiet of my own home, the awareness of being watched lingered like a shadow. I could not escape the phones, the cameras, the whispers. The glances all seemed to find their way into places where intimacy and trust should have been allowed to grow without interference, and over time that intrusion began to seep into the heart of the relationship. Moments that should have belonged only to two people were instead crowded by the opinions, expectations, and assumptions of the outside world. And it is difficult to nurture something as delicate as love when it is constantly under a microscope. No matter how small, seemed to take on a life of its own. Once it left the walls of our home, every smile or lack of it became a headline, every absence became a statement, even silence could be twisted into a story that bore no resemblance to the truth, and with that kind of constant noise surrounding us, it became harder and harder to hear each other. Clearly, the space between us was filled not only with our own challenges, but with the voices of countless others who were never truly part of the relationship, yet found ways to shape it. I often felt that we were no longer just two people trying to make things work, but performers in a never-ending play for an audience that wanted entertainment rather than truth. And as much as I tried to hold on to the sacredness of certain moments, it was like trying to protect a flame in the middle of a storm. The intrusion did not just come from the outside, it began to shape how we interacted with each other. We became more guarded, more careful about what we said and did not because we wanted to, but because we knew that even the smallest thing could be taken out of context and used against us in ways we could not control. And that constant vigilance takes a toll. It makes you second-guess yourself. It makes you question the motives behind even the most innocent acts. It erodes the natural spontaneity that love needs in order to breathe and replace it with caution and calculation. I found myself longing for a space where love could simply exist without having to be defended, where we could work through our difficulties without the weight of the world pressing against us. But such a space was rare and fleeting, and the more the intrusion grew, the less we could find that refuge. It is difficult enough to heal wounds in private, but when those wounds are constantly being touched, prodded, and displayed for others to judge, the healing becomes almost impossible. And in time, the intrusion stopped feeling like something outside of us and started feeling like a permanent part of our lives. A third presence that neither of us had invited, but both of us had to live with, and that presence made the fragile work of repairing and nurturing love feel heavier than it should ever have to be.